This is my video on DNA profiling, also known as genetic fingerprinting. DNA is the building blocks of all living organisms, whether it's human beings, plants, or animals. The DNA structure is found within the cells of every human body, and they are the instructions that our body uses to build our cells, which is very similar to the blueprints that an architect uses. The DNA structure in itself is shaped like a ladder that is twisted around itself so it ends up in a spiral shape. It's called a double helix. On the structure itself, the rungs are made up of different bases that are paired off. And it's the differences in these bases in different people that makes our DNA structures very unique. The only people that would have the same DNA would be identical twins. DNA profiling is a forensic application of DNA typing, which is similar to fingerprint typing, that is used to break down the sample in order to show these bases and show the differences on film. The different methods that are used are basically, there's one that is used to break it down by using enzymes and then putting it through what is called a gel process, where it's actually electrically charged to show tracks in the gel, which is similar to a human being walking along sand. The fingerprints would be uniquely theirs. This sample, once it's broken down and analyzed, would be used to compare to a sample that's already on file. Now, the database that is primarily used for this within the United States is CODIS, which is the Combined DNA Index System. This is funded and run by the FBI, and its database is made up of samples from across the United States, which are submitted by different law enforcement agencies. The DNA sample and database work in that the samples are submitted to the database. It is then run against the existing offender profiles and forensic profiles that come from crime scenes. The matching is actually very simple. It's either a 100% match or a partial match. A 100% match means that the DNA is completely on file. It has been identified towards a crime or a person, and that identifier would be that specific person is whatever culprit that the law enforcement agency is looking for. A partial match means it's not 100%. In that indicates that the profile that was submitted is similar to one already in the database, and that would be indicative of a familial match, meaning someone within the same family is already in the database. And then that in itself can be used for familial matching, which is when you would go find someone that's similar to the sample that's already on file to track down that person that is wanted. CODIS samples are collected by law enforcement agencies, as I said before, and they are collected from different methods. In all 50 states of the United States, these samples are collected from convicted sex offenders. 47 out of the states are collecting profiles from all convicted felony offenders. Other states are using people that are from misdemeanor arrests. One of the problems with the DNA database is that there is a tremendous backlog. It takes time to search through every one of the profiles already in the database, and with more samples being introduced every single day, that process grows even longer. So this process is not as simple as we see on CSI, where you submit the sample and 20 minutes later, within the scope of a commercial break or the next sequence in the show, there's a match. That is one of the limitations that is there. The other limitation, of course, is the process of collecting the samples, which is under fire right now by groups such as the ACLU, in that they are looking at DNA profiling as a violation of privacy, in that you should have the opportunity to resist, in certain circumstances, having your DNA taken and sampled. Now, one of the methods that are being used when it comes to DNA profiling is that they're being used in application in current cases. All forensic crime scene investigators are trained in how to collect DNA samples, and they are actually in the process of going ahead and picking up all biological samples at crime scenes, and then these samples are the ones introduced into systems such as CODIS. They're also being used in cold cases where files that have been sitting in evidence rooms for years are now being reviewed by special squads that are designed to only look at these cold cases, and they're going back and reviewing the evidence and also getting information that's already on file profiled through the database. The last method that I wanted to focus on was the issue of the Innocence Project, where post-conviction DNA samples are tested in order to prove the innocence of people that are sitting in prison for very long times, whether it be long prison terms or life or even death row. The major driving force behind a project such as this is the Innocence Project out of Cardozo Law School in New York. They have been very successful in the cases that they have undertaken in getting these profiles looked at, and in a lot of cases getting these convictions overturned. In the future, I definitely see DNA profiling as spreading, whereas they're going to be used in future different cases such as missing persons, where as we do with children, we keep little files, little cards that identify a child in case they go missing, where it would have a current picture, any biological demographic information, a fingerprint, or maybe even a lock of hair. Now a lot of people are even taking the chance of taking a drop of blood of their child and keeping that on file. They're also going to be using these to do kinship analysis, where you can go ahead and do basically a familial matching, and that will be within the DNA CODIS setup. And these are some things that the FBI are working on. Now, I wanted to go back and talk about the about the effect of DNA profiling when it comes to law enforcement. It is making their jobs a little easier in that they're still doing their traditional detective work, but they also now have the additional resource in DNA to make their lives a little easier. One specific case like this was the first law enforcement usage of it, which was back in 1987 in England with the conviction of Colin Pitchfork. 2 young British teenagers were raped and murdered in a small town in England, and the police were initially baffled. With a little bit of detective work, they went back and identified a suspect. The suspect's father apparently put up a big fight, and he suggested the use of this new process put forward by a man named Alec Jeffreys to test his son's DNA against the samples that were pulled off of the bodies. The sample was negative, and the suspect was let free. The English police decided that they were going to go ahead and pull a semi-dragnet where they tested the DNA of over 4,000 men in the vicinity of the town and the crime. None of these men were a match, but they overheard that there was a man in town bragging that he had paid someone off to submit DNA on his behalf. Once confronted, he confessed to the crime, and his DNA did end up matching the one that was on file, and that illustrates the initial purpose of DNA profiling, which was to exonerate or eliminate suspects from the crimes that they were committed. In the United States now, it's basically used to track down and identify criminals that are wanted for different crimes. So all in all, DNA profiling is something that is only going to continue to grow with the expansion of DNA databases here within the States and worldwide, and also the increased collection of samples, because the more samples you have, the more likely that you are going to find a match for whatever that you're looking for. That is the basics of my paper. That is also a lot of detail into what I included. There also, of course, the major cases that we've all heard about when it comes to DNA, which would be, the recent Casey Anthony case, the Amanda Knox case in Italy, and of course the O.J. Simpson trial, which went ahead and showed that DNA at that time, even though it wasn't new, it was still something that people did not understand, and it was essentially overruled on eyewitness testimony and a successful defense on showing that the evidence may have been contaminated. And that's something that we found that has changed over the years, where jurors are actually believing DNA evidence over eyewitness testimony, because it has been shown that eyewitness testimony can be faulty based on many different factors. So we are seeing the advent of what is called the CSI mentality, or the CSI generation, where science is key, but the science has to be flawless, which of course happened with Casey Anthony. The science was there, but it did not match the scenario presented by the prosecution. The science, most of it was also unproven. So, I mean, that is where our future is headed. But with the advancement of, like I said, of technology and the growth of the industry, it's going to contribute to advances made, sorry, not advances, but it's going to contribute to the simplification of the process, the speeding up of the process, and the cheapening of the materials and education needed in order to complete this process. I hope that concludes and answers any questions that you may have about what my proposal is like. Have a good day.